This is not my art. It's Mai's art.
Mai Yoneyama.
She's a professional Japanese artist with a very dynamic style, thanks to her work in animation, and I think there's a lot that we can learn from it. She's a master of composition, playing with lights, colors, all the while using a ton of different visual elements to pull us into her illustrations. So in this second episode of YouTube Art School
Study time.
I'll attempt to break down her style and techniques and recreate them in a new painting of my own, revealing all her secrets so that you can paint just like her. Not guaranteed. Before I paint anything, let's have a quick observation session and point out some of the cool things she does with her art. Over the past month, I've watched every bit of content I could get my hands on, most of it right here from her channel on YouTube, where she posts a lot of process videos. And if I had to define her style in just one sentence, it would probably be something like a rendered still frame. You know, as if she just paused some anime episode in the middle of a scene and turned that one frame into a fully rendered painting. But it's much more than that too. Often it'll feel like we're right next to the subject in close proximity to the action. And there are a few things that she does to create this effect. In photography, when taking a photo from far away, the subject and its surroundings will often feel relatively proportionate. But when shooting a photo from up close, things tend to get distorted way more. Essentially, things up close will appear huge compared to other elements further back in the scene. And we can also notice the depth of field effect, which will make anything not in focus appear blurry, which is why I think it feels so intimate. It has all the characteristics of a close-up photo that can only be shot if the photographer, or the viewer in this case, is right next to the subject. And I love these paintings here because of how well they read despite the massive quantity of details in them. This could so easily look like a total mess, but her mastery of composition allows her to arrange everything in a harmonious way. As an art teacher, when I teach composition, the emphasis will always be on the 7 principles of art. Not to be confused with the art fundamentals. That's different. The 7 principles of art are emphasis, balance, proportions, repetition, movement, variety, and harmony. Any good illustration should feature all or most of the 7 principles. And to explain what those are real quick, like the emphasis is how clear the focus point is. The first thing we should notice when we look at this basically. Balance then is how well things are laid out, like not placing all the details in the corner while the rest of the space is left unused for no clear reason. Proportions means simply using the correct size for everything. Like if I'm drawing a hand in perspective with foreshortening, I'll want to make sure that it's not too big or too small based on the perspective that I have going on. Repetition is all about using repeated shapes, patterns, and colors, which in theory should help make things look more cohesive and give a distinct visual. Where you don't have repetition or patterns, you tend to have chaos instead, which is not aesthetic. That's science. And anyways, next we have the principle of movement, which is definitely a feature of her illustrations. You'll see all the various elements of the painting arranged in such a way that it creates a certain flow, like a path for the eyes to follow. Her drawings are very flowy, you know what I mean? And then the principle of variety is also present, where she'll mix a bunch of different textures, shapes, and colors to create interest. We can see the use of the complementary color harmony often, specifically using the colors blue and yellow, or like orange and purple, opposites on the chromatic circle. Still though, they'll usually be pretty desaturated, and the majority of her illustrations are more black and white than they are color. Look at how little color there is here. And then she's able to control all of those things and lay them out on the canvas in a way that maintains the principle of harmony really well, where nothing feels out of place. She's juggling a lot of different skills beautifully, and that's not easy to do. I also want to point out her use of lighting to make those visual elements pop some more. She definitely uses light to guide our eyes, which is a very effective tool. And completely unrelated, but is it just me or she got something for bowl cuts? It's funny how a lot of her characters almost seem like they're all wearing helmets. Oh, and before I start painting, I wanted to point out a few cool digital art tricks she uses as finishing touches, like how she uses either regular noise or monochromatic noise, but then she also scales it up so that we notice the grain a little bit more. Other times, she'll just use some subtle color halftone effect in certain cases. She also often colors her line art instead of keeping it black, especially for parts of the drawing that are being lit. She'll also use a lot of blur effect to put certain elements out of focus, and when she does, it tends to come with a bit of RGB effect or chromatic aberration. Very trendy. Oh, and she often wraps up her process with some relatively heavy color corrections, like how she goes from this to this. Interesting. Now then, Let me show you how to do all of that. Being able to break down someone's style is relatively easy when you know what to look for, when you understand the fundamentals of art. Something that you could totally learn with my complete art education program, a university equivalent curriculum that you can do from home at your own pace, along with an awesome Discord community of artists just like you. And best of all, you can get it at a massive discount until the end of the month to celebrate reaching 21,000 enrolled students. So check the link in the video description. If you're already a student, you're what keeps this channel going since I don't take any sponsors, so thank you. I love you. 2 weeks ago, I painted this as I was warming up to her style. I think it had most of the ingredients, but it was also missing just some key ingredients that are staples of her style. In comparison, her work feels a lot flatter, like Japanese anime tends to look like, whereas mine was just a little too shaded. But even before that, the way she draws line art is probably the hardest of her entire style. It's super flowy and delicate. Very feminine, I guess, in a way that I'm not used to. In comparison, mine just felt way too rigid. It also lacked the dreamy qualities that her art tends to have, possibly because I didn't do any color corrections. So there's definitely room for improvement. I'm gonna try this again, but change a couple of things. So for my second attempt, I'm gonna be going with something that's fairly similar, and just like she does, I'm starting with a rough sketch. Actually, 4 sketches as I was practicing drawing dynamic poses that would work for this. The first one here, second one, third one, and then I decided to make the second and third one and to end up with this one, which is a hybrid. That's the one my wife liked the most. And then I drew over it using this new line art brush I made to match what I saw her using in her streams. I'll actually include it in my starter brush pack, so you can get it for free with the link in the video description. So yeah, don't forget to go grab that after the video. It's actually my new favorite for cleaning up line art. It's pretty nice. And now you can have it too. So with my cleaned up line art done, I also blocked in some effects layers to add more movement, as if she fell in water. I always love adding this stuff, but Mai Yoneyama, she goes way harder than I ever did, so that was also pretty challenging. When it comes to coloring though, her process is more familiar. She'll lay down her flat colors on separate layers like I have here, and then use clipping masks to add the shading and highlights on top of it. Right now, this is just a normal layer, but once I make it into a clipping mask, the paint will only apply onto the first normal layer below, aka the skin in this case. So going over all the flat colors the same way, I end up with this shaded drawing. So far we have the line art on top of the layer stack, the flats for each color on their own layer, and then 1 or 2 clipping masks added on top of each of those colors for the shading. Now she uses a lot of soft gradients in her colors, so I did the same here with the hair, for example. Next comes the lighting. I grouped all of my flat colors. I'm gonna be adding a clipping mask on top of that for the cast shadow since I want this whole body to be affected. I'm just using a soft brush and my layer is set to multiply. Now I'm purposely leaving the face in the light to make it pop more, as I darken some other parts of the body to make sure that nothing stands out more than the face. And now I'm basically ready to move on to the effects and show you guys all the cool digital art tricks that she uses. I just went and made the background a little darker to make it feel deeper, creepier. But wait a minute, something is bugging me. We're gonna have to change things. I just can't help myself when it comes to shading. I always prefer more dramatic lighting, so let's redo this real quick. Yes, that's better. And now we can move on to the next chapter where I'll be wrapping this up. There's still a lot to do. In this final chapter, we have a few things left to do, so let me check out my notes. Let's see, I need to finish rendering the effects, add chromatic aberration, add some depth of field, add some noise, and cap it off with some color adjustments. All right, let's do this. Starting with the effects. I felt those looked too flat, so I got rid of that too, and blocked this in as a replacement where I have just more variety in size with big shapes, medium shapes, and small shapes. And I have to say, the effects she uses around her characters are really the hard part of her painting. Finding something that flows nicely took me so much time. It's a very time-consuming process, basically. I also added these bubbles here just to make it feel more like water, and I ended up using this as reference. I never painted water droplets before like this, so this was definitely a fun experience. And now that the effects are done, let's nudge the individual channel layers by a few pixels to create the RGB effect. It's really that simple. Now, clearly that's a little too much, so we can just erase a bit around the face of the character, around the focal point, and to tone down the rest, we'll just rely on the depth of field blur to help with that. So let's do that now. I'm going to be using the iris blur filter in Photoshop for this, and basically what I want is her face and her torso to be in focus, while everything else, behind and in front of her will be out of focus. I think this depth of field effect really helps pull us into the image. Feels a lot more intimate all of a sudden, I think. And then next, I'll add a subtle noise effect to each individual elements like she always does. So for the background, the character, and the effect. So noise, check. And then finally, color adjustments. So looking at the before and after from her own video, we can see overall the contrast is lower and the shadows more bluish purple. There are a few ways to achieve this. I'll try it using the selective adjustment tool in Photoshop. So first, let's remove some of the yellow to get cool blue shadows. And then we can just add more yellow for the warm colors. And that should do the trick, kind of. I'm actually gonna save this separately because that looks pretty nice. But I did tone it down for the full painting, as you can see. That more dreamy vibe wasn't really what I was going for in this illustration. And I also snaked in a layer set to hard light blend mode, where I painted some light colors with a soft brush to help some of these colors pop. And anyways, this is what I ended up with. I'm pretty happy with it, I guess. And I got a few things out of this study, so I'm glad I did it. Hopefully it helped you as well. Mai Yoneyama was another fantastic artist I had never heard of prior to seeing her recommended literally hundreds of times in a previous video about Mika Picasso. And by the way, check that video next if you haven't. I'll put a link in the video description. So here I am asking you again, let me know if this series is worth pursuing, because if this video does good, I'll likely do more. So which popular artist should I study next? Let me know in the comments. Bye.